In my last video about grafting, I showed the general overview of a day in the life of a grafter, but didn't get into the specifics of how to graft. There are a couple reasons for this. First, there are a lot of good resources out there where you can learn to graft from people with much more experience and expertise. Second, it takes time to shoot these videos. Michael and I are on a time crunch, so it didn't occur to me. But after discussing it with Michael before we grafted last weekend, we both thought it would be helpful. If you're watching this, you're likely not a professional nursery operator. Maybe you just want to graft a couple trees for your homestead. Even though Michael and I graft several hundred trees a year, we're still small potatoes. We're homestead grafters, so we thought it would be beneficial for others with the same or less experience to see what grafting looks like when it's done by amateurs. Today will be bench grafting, which, if you recall, is any grafting done at the bench, meaning before the tree is planted. Our method is called whip and tongue. First, let's discuss all the materials you'll need to bench graft in this fashion. Water. When I learned to graft, the farmer who taught me used wet burlap to cover the roots of grafted trees. Every once in a while he would soak the burlap with a hose. The idea is to keep the roots covered and moist, so they're not exposed to the air. The burlap is doubled over and the trees are put in between the two layers, like a letter in an envelope. I've used this method ever since, until Michael came along and offered a fresh perspective. The burlap method is fine for a few trees, but opening and closing the burlap every tree is a huge waste of time when you add it up over the course of a whole day. So now we fill a bucket with water and put the grafted trees into it. When we finish a variety, they're removed to the fresh bucket, packed in sawdust, and that is soaked thoroughly. It does not seem to hurt the trees to be sitting in water for an hour or so. Next, tree coat. This is also called grafting wax by some, but I don't think that's accurate. Grafting wax is its own thing with unique characteristics. This is used to seal the top of the graft scion so moisture cannot escape through the wound. Scion wood. This is the wood from the variety you would like to clone. It's grafted onto the rootstock. Scion wood comes from 1-year-old growth. Another way to say this is last year's growth. We get scion from Fedco trees for the varieties they want us to graft, but we also collect our own for personal use. Growth from the previous year will be a different color and texture than the older wood on the tree. Surveyor's tape. I've also heard this referred to as flagging tape. I use them interchangeably. Apologies if that isn't correct where you live. We use this to label the trees once they've been grafted. We label with permanent marker, writing the variety, the type of rootstock onto which it's been grafted, in this case Antonovka, noted here as ANT, and the date. We always make at least 2 labels per variety. This is not a permanent labeling solution. The writing will fade in the field. But while the trees are forming the union in the darkness of the basement or a cold area, and then for a few weeks at least outside, this is fine. We have a longer lasting system which I'll show when we plant the trees out into the nursery in another few weeks. Grafting tape. This is the material that is wrapped around the grafting union. It serves 2 functions. First, it holds everything in place and relatively stable while the rootstock and scion are joining together. Second, it helps slow respiration from the wounds you make in each piece. The type shown here is parafilm. There are other materials that are used for different circumstances. Parafilm is really nice because of several features unique to the material. First, it sticks to itself. This is important for finishing the wrap. Other materials need to be tied off with a single overhand on a bite. In this case, the bite would be the tree. Another very nice feature of parafilm grafting tape is the fact that it breaks down over time. This reduces maintenance work because you don't have to remove the tape. Another type I've used is PVC tape, which is exactly what it sounds like, tape made out of PVC material. It's incredibly durable and stronger than parafilm. I typically use it for top dressing, which is grafting to a tree that's already planted out in the field or orchard. I also use it when the graft has a lot of pressure on it, either from gravity or, as is more often the case, high winds. It works well for what it's designed for, but it has drawbacks for bench grafting. First, it needs to be tied off, which takes more time than simply firmly pressing the parafilm to itself. Second, and this is the big one, it needs to be removed by hand. I once bench grafted about 120 trees with PVC tape because I was out of parafilm and that's all the supplier had. I'll never do it again. Taking all that tape off is a huge hassle. The tape comes on rolls, but we rip several dozen 3 to 4 inch strips at a time. This makes it much faster when grafting. Whenever we switch to a new variety, we replenish the pile, so hopefully we don't need to stop in the middle of a variety to get more tape. Finally, the knife. This is a grafting knife. I think I got this one at Johnny's several years ago. You can find them from lots of places online, or, preferably, someplace local, or a small nursery supply place near you. I've also purchased several from Fedco. I have a handful of them. I like to sharpen them all at the beginning of a grafting day and just switch to a new knife when one gets dull. You only need one though. I've been told you can use any knife to graft. This knife has a single-sided bevel. I don't know if that makes a difference. I've always used this type, so I can't offer comparisons or confirm any knife will work. But logic tells me that this is totally accurate. People have been grafting for centuries. No matter what knife you use, make sure it's very sharp and well honed. This is a diamond sharpener I've had for years. I think I got this from either Johnny Selected Seeds or Fedco Trees. I've had it for a long time, so I can't remember. Both Johnny's and Fedco are only 25 minutes from my home here in Maine, and local is a big priority for me. Any sharpening stone and technique you like is fine. This one is quick and I've used it for years, so I stick with it. The last thing to do is flip the knife over and swipe the burrs from the edge. I didn't show it in this video, but I usually strop it quickly on my canvas pants. Here, Michael demonstrates an old-time method for determining whether or not your blade is sharp. He is not pressing into his thumbnail. Rather, he is lightly sliding the blade across his nail, moving from cuticle to the nail tip. If the knife catches on the nail, it's sharp. If it slides across without catching, keep sharpening. Once the blade is sharp and you've got your water, tapes, wax, and other materials all set up, choose your variety. Since we're grafting for a nursery, it's provided for us. We also attend a scion exchange every spring and get varieties for our own orchards. No matter what you're grafting, do only one variety at a time. Make sure everything is labeled very well. Never start a new variety until you're completely done labeling and putting away another. Once wood starts flying off rootstock and scion, everything looks the same. If you ever have the thought, "I'll remember this," you're wrong. Label everything, and don't be afraid to go overboard on labeling. This will also be true when you put things out in the field. We label our trees and make maps. Michael is very careful to keep the label in a usable state here. We may not go through all the scion for a particular variety, or we may need to finish a variety on another day. We try not to do that. So the bundle may need to be rewrapped. Now he's selecting for size. We've already looked at the rootstock we have to work with, and we have a bunch that's on the large end of the caliber range. We want to try to get the larger caliber scion wood matched with those. Now let's take a look at the parts of the tree. First, the cambium layer, which is the darker ring just inside the bark. This is where everything related to the graft happens. In order for the union to take place, the cambium on the scion wood needs to be touching the cambium on the rootstock. The more cambium surface area in contact, the better the opportunity for the union to be successful. Then there's the layer just inside the cambium. For all intents and purposes related to grafting, this layer serves no purpose. Nothing happens here. The same is true of the pith, which is the light-colored section in the center. It doesn't do anything for the union. However, it's important for the graft because it's like a target for your incision. The farmer and friend who taught me to graft, Mark Allen, who owns and runs the Living Land Farm, always said, "You make your cut just north of the pith." Michael demonstrates here. It's actually quite remarkable to me that he was able to do such a good job while both his hands were on the table and under a camera.
Well done.
This cut on the scion wood is mirrored and done in exactly the same place on the rootstock. To put the scion and rootstock together, you need to insert pieces of each into the other, like tabs on a box. Use pressure in both hands to force open the incision you've made in each piece. Then slide the faces against each other until the tongue of the scion enters the incision of the rootstock, and the tongue of the rootstock enters the incision on the scion. Once this is done, align the pieces so as much of the cambium layer in one is touching the cambium layer of the other. Once you have everything lined up the way you like it, grab a piece of tape and start wrapping. I don't know if there's a right and wrong way. Both Michael and I instinctively start at the bottom, on the rootstock, and wrap upward, toward the scion wood. I don't know if it will work to wrap from the scion down. I don't think so, but I've never tried. You need to keep slight pressure on the tape, but not too much because it will rip easily. We're finding this is especially true for older tape. We actually bought a big box of tape last year, and this year, the tape that we had left over seems to rip more easily. In the future, we're only going to buy what we need for a single season. Even though it's more expensive per roll, the annoyance factor related to ripping tape is very high, and we both agree it's worth a few extra dollars. You need to wrap all the way around the exposed cambium. The tape stretches, and you should have enough to go up and down at least once. Then, press the end into the previous layer. Be careful not to put so much pressure on your tape that you dislodge your graft. If anything, the tape should strengthen the connection, but, in reality, it's only there to hold the graft you've made, which, hopefully, could support itself, all things being equal, which they never are once you plant them in the wind, rain, and with wild animals strolling through your nursery at night. Finally, make sure you dab a little wound dressing, in our case tree coat, on the top of the scion where the cambium is exposed. You don't need very much. And be careful not to get it on your hands or clothes if you can avoid it. If you do, make friends with it because it's going to be there a while. Remember, it's designed not to come off the tree. Your skin and clothing is no different. Once you have all your trees for a single variety grafted, be sure to label them. I cannot stress this enough. They all look the same except for certain varieties that have distinctive coloring. Those are far and few between. Label your trees. Go overboard on labeling. We pack our trees in damp sawdust in buckets and tree planting pots. Make sure the sawdust is well packed around the roots. You don't want any air pockets. Then soak thoroughly and keep the sawdust moist until planting.